So how many of you recognize what this is? No? How about now? That's right. This is the Game Boy player attachment for the GameCube. And what this accessory does is allows you to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games on your TV via the Nintendo Gamecube. And Nintendo released this accessory in 2003 to Japan, the United States, and other territories as well. And like the GameCube itself, the Game Boy player was released in a variety of colors, but as in typical Nintendo fashion, only in Japan. The United States and I believe other territories saw only a black color release of the Game Boy player. So if you're interested in other colors or you have a different colored GameCube such as Indigo, Spice, Platinum, you're going to have to import a Japanese Game Boy player to match that color. And the good news is about the Game Boy player is it is region free. At least the hardware is. The Game Boy player, in order to run, requires software. It requires a startup disk. This is for the US release of the Game Boy player. And this is for the Japanese release of the Game Boy player. So of course the disk needs to be compatible with the GameCube system that you have. I happen to have 3 Game Boy players. I have the black one that I bought here in the United States in 2003. But since I have a Platinum GameCube and I also imported a Spice Japanese GameCube, I really wanted the matching Game Boy players to go along with these two systems. So I imported the Japanese Spice Game Boy player and the Japanese Platinum Game Boy player. And as you can see, the actual hardware is identical to its United States counterpart. So I was thinking, an all-Spice GameCube with an all-Spice Game Boy player, an all-Platinum GameCube with an all-Platinum Game Boy player, it might be interesting, if possible, to sort of mix and match the color combinations. And that's where I came up with this idea of a sort of a mod, an easy mod to do. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If you take a look at the Game Boy player hardware itself, there really isn't all that much to it. It looks strange because it has this shape on it that matches with the underside of the GameCube. And these two fit together so that the Game Boy player can interface with the serial port on the bottom of the GameCube. And it matches the GameCube footprint exactly. So in order to do this color switching mod that I'm talking about, you need to, of course, take apart the Game Boy player. The Game Boy player is held together only by 8 security bit screws. And in order to open a piece of hardware with security bit screws, you're going to need, of course, a security bit. And this is a security bit. You can get them on eBay, you can get them on hardware store websites. But basically what a security bit is a star-shaped screw. It's just to stop consumers from tampering with the insides of electronic products. So with your game bit, what you're going to need to do is loosen all 8 of the screws. And I've already done that on my Spice Game Boy player. And since there's so many connecting points, there's 8 screws and there's some clips, it may take a little work to get the cover off, but just lift on all corners, you'll eventually be able to pop the cover off. And there you go. There's the inside of the Game Boy player. This is 100% Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance compatible hardware. There's no emulation going on. And as you can see, it really doesn't need to be as big as it is. It has this big filler piece right here, only so that the Game Boy player shell matches the footprint of the GameCube itself. So for the mod, I've taken apart my Spice Game Boy player. I'm going to do the same with my Platinum Game Boy player. And of course, you're going to have to loosen all 8 security bit screws, and then the top should lift off. And there we have it. So now what we're left with are identical bottoms and tops of the Game Boy player, with the exception of color. And you'll notice, you take the top off, it's very thin. So my idea was, take the top of the Spice Game Boy player and put it on the bottom of the Platinum Game Boy player, and do the same over here. And you're thinking, why? What does that do? Well, since the top piece is so thin, what it does is create a very thin band of color between the bottom piece of the Game Boy player and then the GameCube. So as you can see, when I put these together, which I'm going to take some time to retighten all 8 or 16 of the security bits, so bear with me while I do that. Alright, so there we go. Everything's screwed back together. So that just leaves the matter of dropping the GameCubes onto the Game Boy players. So we will drop the Spice GameCube onto the silver-topped Game Boy player. And we will drop the Platinum GameCube onto the Spice-topped Game Boy player. And you may or may not know that on the bottom, just for safety, I guess, there are 2 screws that can be tightened with just a small flathead screwdriver, just to ensure that the Game Boy player stays secured to the bottom of the GameCube. So once I get that done with the Platinum, you can see the result of the first mod. So you have a Platinum GameCube with a band of spice colors separating the Game Boy player, which I think is pretty cool. Let's take a look at the other one. But of course, for safety's sake, let's tighten them up. And there you have the Spice GameCube separated from the Spice Game Boy player with a band of platinum color. And of course you could do the exact same thing with a black Game Boy player, using the top of the black unit to separate the colors of the bottom of the Game Boy player and the GameCube. So at the moment I have only 2 GameCubes, Japanese Spice and US Platinum, and I think these look pretty cool. I like this mod, so to speak. I'm not one for painting consoles, I don't care to do that. I think this is a really safe and easy way to just add a little bit of individualized flair to your GameCube hardware. And of course you could do the same thing with the indigo color or any of the other color Game Boy players that may have been released in Japan. The only problem is that you'd have to import them. So if this mod interests you, maybe now you can take this and do it for yourself. Till next time, take it easy.